Uberdemon here. I'm going to dedicate this episode to Stage Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's son, who has recently passed at a all too young age, 36. He's passed a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to address that on this episode. Um, on top of being in films with his father, and he's somewhat of a film preservationist, or was. He co-founded Grindhouse Releasing, um, and great releases on. Uh, this was the Grindhouse Releasing edition of Cannibal Holocaust, which I have autographed by the director Rogero Deodato. It's definitely a prized treasure in my collection. Cat in the Brain, a lost Lucio Fulci classic, where Lucio stars in the film. Of course, the Lucio Fulci classic, one of my favorite horror films of all time. Absolutely one of my absolute favorite horror films ever, beyond. And another great film, favored by Eli Roth and a lot of other big name Hollywood directors. Pieces. Another great release. Hopefully this doesn't mean an end of Grindhouse Releasing, but I'm sure they will definitely miss Sage. I know Sylvester will miss Sage, and although I never knew him, I will certainly miss him as well. Rest in peace, Sage. Greetings, Fiend and Fiendettes. It's been an awfully long time, but I'm back for another installment of Uberdemon's Movie Morgue. Um, and just real quick, I've been gone for a long time. Probably not going to be as frequent as I used to be. I know I was doing these pretty frequently up until about a year ago. I got a potbelly pig around that time, and a lot of time invested in that, and work has been crazy. And my wife is expecting, so these probably aren't going to be nearly as frequent as they used to be. Um, my time is not as free as it used to be, unfortunately. I'm not going to say goodbye yet. I don't think I'm in that position at this time, but these are definitely going to be a lot fewer than they used to be, and I apologize for that. But this is going to be a very special episode of Uber Demon's Movie Morgue, so hopefully this will make up for the long lapse, and hopefully these will be a lot more focused and special when they come along now. And again, I apologize, but my time is, this being a free show, it's not what it used to be. I'm going to jump right in here and talk about, have a music segment. I've talked about this band before on my show, but this is a very special thing to talk about with them. They've recently come out with a new album, and I'm wearing the shirt, and I've shown you this one before. This is their first album, and the band is Calabrese. This is their inaugural album, 13 Halloweens. Their sophomore album, The Traveling Vampire Show. Their third album, and before the newest album, most recent, Calabrese 3, They Call Us Death. A great album. They're all great albums. and the reason I'm saying this is special is because I've had to make a pact with the band Calabrese. When they're recording their newest album, some strange things happened, and this is the new album is the only record we have left. This is their new album, Dayglow Necros, and as getting this through mysterious circumstances, my part of the bargain was to do a full review of this album once I got it. It's mysteriously showed up in my mail today, and I listened to it, and I've been listening to it nonstop ever since right before the filming of this episode. It's a great album. I really like this album. You're not going to. I mean, it's definitely Calabrese sound. I'm going to say that this album, a lot of the tracks aren't as aggressive as their last album, but that doesn't mean that they're bad songs by a long shot. It's a great album with great songs. It's definitely a more mature album for the band, I believe. The sounds just as polished, just as great. There are some more aggressive songs on here, but like I said, it's a more mature album for them. And it definitely shows in the music. Again, great album, a lot of great songs. Dead Don't Rise, Coffin of Ruins, Heart Possession, Ghost Wolves, The Man Who Lived Twice, She Hasn't Been Herself in Years, Darkhold, Red Slash, Hungry Are the Dogs, History of Nothing, Bring Us Hell, Damned to the Night, Sea of Dirt. And this album really defines their own sound, as has, I mean, all their other albums have been leading up to this. I mean, Calabrese has always had their own sound, but they've often, being a horror rock band, compared to other bands like the Misfits and Necromantics and stuff like that. But this definitely sets their sound apart from their other albums by a long shot. Again, I can't stress how awesome this album is and how much I'm enjoying it already and how much I'm going to continue to enjoy it. Again, like one of the best concerts I've ever seen too live, just because it was an intimate venue and you really felt like you're a part of the show, front and center with the band. It was a really, really good time, and I was glad I got to be a part of that when they rolled through here and played at ES Jungle probably about a year or so ago. The packaging on this, definitely my favorite packaging out of all their albums so far. Reminds me a lot of old pre-code horror comics, like the EC comics in particular, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and Haunt of Fear. And the interesting segue here, I'm going to talk about pre-code horror comics again. And again, I'm going to say thank you to the band Calabrese for giving me a copy of the album and letting me review it here on my show. You guys gave me a way to come back to my fans, and you guys, I'm eternally grateful for the things you do for your fans, and I just hope you keep doing the work, for years to come. So back to the segue. The album cover reminds me a lot of EC horror comics and the whole packaging. I'm going to show you this real quick. This is the newest issue of Horror Hound as of this filming, and this cover is actually a riff on an old Mad Magazine cover. And the reason why I say I'm bringing this up is because Mad Magazine is the surviving comic book or magazine of EC Comics. It used to be Education Comics when they first started off, when William Gaines' father ran the company. And when Gaines turned over and started creating other more edgy comics, the horror comics, they changed it to Entertaining Comics. Again, they did Tales from the Crypt. This is a shot of a Horror Hound where they were talking about anthology horror, and Tales from the Crypt fits right in with that. But they did, the most popular ones were obviously Tales from the Crypt because of the TV show, but also borrowed from The Vault of Horror and Haunt of Fear were their other two major horror comics. They also had other comics like shock suspense stories, crime and war comics, science fiction comics. I've got a couple of 1990s reprints. This is one of the shock suspense covers. It looks like this guy is a heroin addict based on the syringe and stuff next to the table. This is one of my favorite covers, Tales from the Crypt, the zombie dragging the guy down the quicksand. This one's probably one of my absolute favorite covers of all time, a zombie coming out of a coffin in a mausoleum, coming after a guy. And again, these are not original printings of the comics. They are reprints that came out in the 1990s. And around the same time, and the reprints and these books that I'm getting ready to show you all came out around the early 1990s when during the the peak of success of the TV show. And I'll talk more about the TV show here in a little while. But around the peak of the popularity of the TV show, they also came out with some books. Random House did, which kind of brought back to light some of the old Tales from the Crypt stories from the comic books in a more of a print fashion with some pictures scattered here and there. To my knowledge, there are at least 5 volumes. I have volumes 1, 3, 4, and 6. There's also a joke book called Cackles from the Crypt that came out at the same time, which I don't have yet. I hope to get it again. I know there's a couple copies floating out there pretty cheap on Amazon. Can't find volume 2 anywhere. I've tried many times in vain. But I'm going to continue to talk about pre-code horror comics here before I get into the Tales from the Crypt TV series and movies. This is a little book that I got off of Amazon. It's really cheap, only like $6 off of Amazon, $5 or $6. It's got a bunch of artwork from a bunch of pre-code horror comics and has a fridge magnet in the back. I'm not going to take the fridge magnet out, but I'm going to leave it in there for collector purposes. Some weird like that. I also have a few actual pre-code horror comics. These are the actual first printings of these pre-code horror comic magazines. They're more magazines. And some of the magazines that were able to stick around a little bit longer after the ban in the late 1950s of the horror comics, because magazines could get away with a lot more, whereas comic books were, at the time, were more geared towards children, or so people thought. And that created the comic book code that you used to see on the DC and Marvel comic books. But that, thankfully, is becoming a thing of the past. A lot of the more modern comic books, even the mainstream Marvel, DC, are taking darker turns, becoming more gritty, sense for more gritty storytelling. So it's cool to see, things come full circle. And once when there was no code, it looks like a lot of people are not going with the code anymore, especially people doing horror-themed material in their comic books. I'm going to show you a couple of books I've shown you before, I believe. Four Color Fear. This was a book about featuring pre-code horror comics that were not from EC Comics. And this was The Horror, which kind of covered the gamut of all pre-code horror comics providers, including EC Comics. There's a couple of EC pictures in here. And this book came with a DVD, which had a news special that was on during the 1950s about pre-code horror comics, about how they thought, sorry, I'm cutting out a frame here, how they were turning children into juvenile delinquents, and which led to the formation of the comic book code. IDW and with Yo Books come up with a series of horror and pre-code horror anthology books, which features work from various artists or various themes. The first book to come out was Frankenstein, and I saw that when I bought the other two books that I just showed you. But I looked at it and it wasn't that cool, but I found these online, and these are actually really neat. This one, I think, pretty much hones in on Bob Powell's work. The cover image here is from one of the comic books inside, and that was probably one of the cooler ones that they had in terms of the artwork and the overall flow of the comic. And the newest book in that line is the Zombies book. If you look at the back of this one, you can see the Frankenstein and the one I just showed you. But this one here is dedicated to zombie comic books, and regular watchers know I'm a huge fan of zombies, so I had to get this one naturally. So that's kind of the literary segment, which segues right into my movie segment for this episode. So back in the 1970s, before the Tales from the Crypt TV show was a twinkle in anyone's eye, and before, when the pre-code horror comics were pretty much squashed by the comic book code for the most part, with a few exceptions, there were a couple of movies that Amicus Studios put out, which I've talked about Amicus before. They're a British company. And the two of their more popular movies were based off a couple of the EC titles, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Some of the stories in this, or some of the stories that are portrayed in these two movies, overlap in the TV show. One more notable one is from the Tales from the Crypt movie, and All Through the House, which is the one with the lady that offs her husband on Christmas, and there's a escaped madman dressed like Santa Claus prowling the area that she lives in. Uh, it's a classic story. It's one that resonates with a lot of fans of any form of Tales from the Crypt or EC Comics. But both are great movies. If you find this for a decent price, pick it up. You won't be disappointed. It's great 70s horror, anthology style horror, and they're classics. And I will put these in periodically because I just enjoy them so much. So I'm kind of going to jump ahead a little bit. After the success of the Tales from the Crypt TV series, it was natural for them to actually make full-length motion pictures. To date, they have made 3 motion pictures. 2 have had theatrical releases that I'm aware of. 1 has not, I believe. One of The Ritual is the most recent one, and I believe it was a direct-to-DVD release. I haven't seen it, but I do have Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight, which was the first full-length motion picture spawned from the TV series. And we have Tales from the Crypt Bordello of Blood, which was the second movie spawned from the TV series. There's also a cartoon series that came out around the same time. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the DVDs of that or VHS. I wish I did. Called Tales from the Crypt Keeper. It spawned a line of action figures. I used to have the talking Crypt Keeper from the children's line of action figures. Spencer's did a whole line of horror-themed talking dolls that were bigger and more expensive. And the Crypt Keeper was one of those too. I had a bunch of them, but I could never find the Crypt Keeper. And rest assured, if I would have found that version of the Crypt Keeper, I probably would have bought that too at the time. So, jumping back in the early 1990s, if you were a child, teenager, young adult at that time, Friday night would come on, and if you didn't get out of the house on Friday nights very frequently, or if you were younger, you watch TV usually. This is pre-internet, beginning of the internet even. TV was still a main source of entertainment, especially cable broadcast TV in the United States. So you're on Friday night. It's starting to get late. You're not quite ready for bed yet. You're flipping through the channels and you see this thing that you've never seen before. You may or may not be a horror fan, but you come quickly to realize that this is a TV show based off of the comic book Tales from the Crypt. Well, you may or may not know that the first time seeing it. But there were 7 seasons that came out. This is the season 1 box set. This one's definitely worth it because it has a lot of those initial shows that everyone remembers from the first season. And as a bonus feature on the second disc, you get the Tales from the Crypt from comics to screen, or from comic books to television documentary, which is really great, insightful documentary on pre-code horror comics, and especially EC and how they came to be, how they came about, the entire history of EC Comics, and the end of the pre-code horror comics up to the synthesis of the Tales from the Crypt TV series. Highly recommend that documentary if you haven't seen it. Season 2, in my opinion, has a lot of really good episodes on it. Some of the best in the entire series, in my opinion. Target has been selling a lot of the first 6 seasons in sets of 2. So season 1, season 2, season 3, and season 4, and season 5 and season 6 in 2-packs. You can still find them out there if you can. They're really cheap, $20 for 2 seasons. That's really cheap, considering that when they first came out, they were $20 to $25 a set, sometimes $30. So if you can still find those in Target, grab them up. They're great. They're going fast. There's season 3. Still some great episodes in this one. Not as good as the first 2 seasons, I would say, but there's still some really good gems in this one. Again, kind of as you go on, I mean, there's still some exceptions, and I mean, some more than others. Season 4 had a lot more memorable episodes for me. The first one is one of my favorites that Tom Hanks directed, called None But the Lonely Heart, I believe it was called. Yeah, None But the Lonely Heart. That one was really cool. It's one of the ones I remember watching as a child. on TV. But season 4, and comparing season 4 to season 3, season 4 is I like better. Season 5, again, this one's hit or miss. There's some really good ones on here though still. Each season has some really good episodes, but some seasons are more hit or miss than others, and I think a lot of that depends on the source material they got it from. Season 6, again, pretty good season overall. This one seemed to kind of ramp up as it went along. Again, some misses, but a lot of hits in this season. The 7th and final season. This was kind of an interesting season because a lot of the actors in this season are British. And it's not terribly surprising given the background of the Amicus films, but it was interesting because the Crypt Keeper in the first episode even mentions moving to England. So I thought that was really interesting, and I believe just about every episode, except for the last episode, featured British actors and actresses. Again, there are some misses, but there's quite a few hits. There's one episode directed by William Maloney. I probably pronounced his last name wrong. The guy, the Dark Castle guy that's been doing all the William Castle remakes of House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts and all that stuff. He directed a really excellent episode on this. One of my new favorites that I don't remember seeing growing up, but it was a great episode. The last episode is a cartoon called The Third Pig, and it's a gory take on the Three Little Pigs that is not to be missed. But yeah, that's all 7 seasons of Tales from the Crypt released to DVD. And before I go, I'm going to talk about one more movie that I've seen recently that I bought recently. I bought a lot of movies, but for time purposes, I'm going to keep this fairly short. Herschel Gordon Lewis, Godfather of Gore. It was directed by Frank Henenlotter, who directed Basket Case, Brain Damage, Frankenhooker, Bad Biology, and Jimmy Malson was co-directed it. It's a great documentary about Herschel Gordon Lewis and David Friedman, and all the nudie cuties, gore classics, all the movies they've made over the years. And it's a really insightful, great documentary. One of the best film documentaries I've ever seen, just in terms of the level of insight. These people were film pioneers. A lot of what is in modern horror films today we owe to these people. And this documentary, if you're a fan of horror and documentaries and learning about how films are made, I highly recommend giving this a watch. I hate to say it, but this episode has come to an end. You're not going to see these as frequently as you used to, and again, I apologize for that, but I'm not saying goodbye. So I will see you next time here on YouTube. Thanks for watching.